Hi, this is part two of John Calvin, A Life of John Calvin by Alister McGrath, dealing specifically with the Michael Servetus affair, about which we as Jehovah's Witnesses have very strong opinions, which are often not very well informed. So here's what McGrath does to develop the idea that not just in Calvin's Geneva, but in Europe in that day, whether you're a Protestant or a Catholic, you agreed that certain sins were worthy of capital punishment. He goes on about the importance of guarding the public against heresy in those days and how highly that was prioritized by the reformers, especially those in Geneva. The modern reader may be inclined to regard heresy as the expression of an opinion at odds with the prevailing orthodoxy, and as such to be welcomed as an expression of creativity and personal liberty. It must be stressed that this is a modern understanding of the notion, for which the 16th century was not prepared. Detailed socio-political studies of the major historical Christian heresies suggest that they were not merely concerned with ideas, but with a much broader social and political agenda. For example, the Donatist controversy of the late classical period might seem merely to concern rival theories of the nature of the Christian church. The fundamental agenda, however, concerned the tensions between the indigenous Berber people of North Africa and Roman colonists. The theological issues were often the veneer imposed upon social and national movements, concerned with challenging the socio-political status quo as much as its official religious standpoint. The considerable popular appeal associated with heresies in the medieval period usually reflects not so much interest in their religious ideas as a perception of their social or political implications. A particularly illuminating example of this is provided by Hussitism, the movement associated with Jan Hus in the early 15th century. Although the movement might notionally seem to center upon such theological abstractions as the nature of the church, its primary strength lay in its potent appeal to Bohemian nationalism and its social and economic programs. The Catholic Church was obliged to move quickly against the heresy on account of its potentially destabilizing tendencies. It was the power, as much as the doctrine, of the Church which was under threat. With the coming of the Reformation to the cities of Western Europe, the destabilizing tendencies of heresy became increasingly obvious. From the beginning, there was a tension between those reformers, such as Luther, Zwingli, Bullinger, Butzer, and Calvin, who saw reform as a symbiotic process involving reformers and magistrates acting together within the established order, and those radical reformers, such as Jakob Hutter, who regarded the true Reformation as sweeping away the existing corrupt social and political order. Zurich City Council felt itself under threat from such radical elements in the 1520s and took every step available to prevent them attaining any influence within the city. The radical wing of the Reformation, also known as Anabaptism, was primarily characterized at the religious level by its rejection of infant baptism. At the social level, however, its views were radically anti-authoritarian, often including important hints of communism. Events at Munster, which came under radical control in 1534, confirmed the serious threat that radical wing of the Reformation posed to existing social structures. Although Protestant and Roman Catholic city councils might differ on many matters, they were united in their belief that heresy threatened the stability and hence the existence of their cities. The fate of Munster, which had to be retaken by a protracted and bloody siege, brought home the fact that heresy concerned far more than mere ideas. It posed a serious menace to urban existence. No city could afford to allow such a destabilizing influence within its bounds. The drastic steps adopted after 1534 by Strasbourg City Council to eliminate the radical threat illustrate graphically how seriously this threat was taken at the time. Geneva was no exception. Once it had been proven that there was a heretic in their midst, with sympathies which placed him alongside the radical wing of the Reformation, the Genevan authorities had little option but to act, despite the difficulties occasioned by the fact that Servetus was not, strictly speaking, subject to Genevan justice. It is not entirely clear why Servetus should have chosen to visit Geneva. Possibly he had paused in the city on his way to seek refuge in Basel, as Calvin had before him. He had already been condemned as a heretic by the Catholic authorities in France. He had, however, escaped from prison in Vienna and made his way to Geneva to be arrested on 13th of August, 1553. He had recently published a book entitled, I'm going to have a go at the Latin here, Christianismi Restitutio. Perhaps there was a deliberate parallel here with Calvin's Institutio Christianae Religionis, which is Institutes of the Christian Religion. The work denied one central article of Christian faith, the Trinity, and one traditional practice, infant baptism. Although Calvin clearly regarded the former as infinitely the more serious, to judge by his ferocious verbal assaults on Servetus, assaults, it must be said, the nature of which confirms the general impression of Calvin's increasing pettiness and bitterness as old age approached. It is probably the latter which holds the key to the city council's anxieties, for denial of infant baptism instantly aligned Servetus with the Anabaptists. The word literally means re-baptizers, the radical wing of the Reformation which had caused such problems at Zurich, Munster, Strasbourg, and elsewhere. Anabaptists had abolished private property and made all possessions a common utility. They had introduced the principle of economic equality. In short, they posed a vital threat to the economic and social order upon which Geneva's fragile existence depended. The city council could have had little doubt that a real threat existed. Although it was Calvin, acting as an individual, who arranged for Servetus's accusation and arrest, it was the city council who, despite their intense hostility to Calvin, took over the case and prosecuted Servetus with vigor. This caused some surprise to outside observers. Wolfgang Musculus wrote of his belief that Servetus evidently expected to benefit from the hostility of the city council towards Calvin. It should be noted that Calvin's role in these procedures was subsequently that of technical advisor or expert witness rather than prosecutor. On the 21st of August, the Genevan authorities wrote to Vienna, asking for further information concerning their captive. In particular, they requested duplicates of the evidence, information, and arrest warrant against Servetus. The Catholic authorities at Vienna immediately demanded the extradition of Servetus to face charges there. The city council then offered him a choice. He could either return to Vienna or remain at Geneva and face the outcome of Genevan justice. It is significant that Servetus chose to remain at Geneva. As matters had progressed, it became increasingly clear that the council had two options. They could banish Servetus from the city or execute him. Uncertain as to how to proceed, the city council consulted with Geneva's allies at Bern, Zurich, Schaffhausen, and Basel. The responses were unambiguous. The entry for the registry of the Venerable Company of Pastors recorded the city council's decision, October 25, 1553, as follows. Their lordships, having received the opinions of the churches of Basel, Bern, Zurich, and Schaffhausen upon the Servetus affair, condemned the said Servetus to be led to Champy and there to be burned alive. Perhaps with memories of the burning of certain of his friends at Paris in mind, Calvin himself attempted to alter the mode of execution to the more humane beheading. He was ignored. The following day, Servetus was executed. Geneva did not have a professional executioner. Its hangman, like its jailers and all other public officers, was an amateur. The burning was a botched job. In 1903, a granite monument was erected at the site of Servetus's execution. Its inscription condemns an era which belonged to his century. That's what the monument actually says. Yet sadly, every major Christian body which traces its history back to the 16th century has blood liberally scattered over its credentials. Roman Catholic, Lutheran, Reformed, and Anglican all have condemned and executed their Servetuses, whether directly or, as in the case of Calvin himself, indirectly. It is fair to suggest that it is improper to single out Calvin as if he were somehow the initiator of this vicious trend. or a particularly vigorous and detestable supporter of the practice, where the majority of his enlightened contemporaries wished to be abolished. The case of Etienne Lecourt, who was publicly degraded, strangled, and burned by the Inquisition at Rouen on 11th of December 1533 for suggesting that, among other things, women will preach the gospel, would seem considerably more disturbing. Perhaps historians, like everyone else, have their axes to grind. The aftermath of the Servetus affair was considerable. Basel, with its growing sympathy for libertarian policies, was shocked by the execution. Sebastian Castellio, anticipating more modern views, wrote a pamphlet at Basel, arguing forcefully for toleration in matters of religion, and for that matter just about everything else. It prompted Theodore de Beze, that's more commonly known as Theodore Beza, to develop an influential theory of government which accounted for and justified the behavior of the city council. The affair also served to propel Calvin still further into the forefront of Protestantism, consolidating his already considerable reputation as a religious writer and thinker. As letter after letter from admiring colleagues in Germany and elsewhere indicates, Calvin was now regarded as the defender of the true faith within Protestant circles. Within Geneva, though, he was still seriously isolated. That situation, however, began to change and would culminate in the Revolution of 1555, which established Calvin's authority within the city once and for all. I'll put in a link to a Vivian video, which is about her testimony that as a Jehovah's Witness I knew next to nothing about a man who transformed the world, and that, of course, is John Calvin. And she's referencing a book by our former pastor, Victor Shepherd, who is one of the world's foremost Calvin scholars. See you soon.